Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining me. I am happy to be here today, and my name is Beth Weir, as you all know, probably, and I'm here today to talk about the Book of Style, Chapter 12, Units of Measure. So hopefully you'll enjoy this. I'm just going to minimize my window here, and hopefully you'll be able to see my screen. Some of you will probably notice as well at this point that you can check out the materials that there is, the PDF, sorry, the PowerPoint is attached to this as well. I'm not sure if you can see that, but I did attach it just in case that you might like it. Barring that, don't waste too much time if you can't see it, because I will certainly send it as usual to anybody who would like it as well. So, everybody, thank you again for joining me. You can input your questions along the way, but there will be a couple of places where we're going to actually stop and ask for questions as well. So let's dig right in. Again, as I mentioned, we are doing the Book of Style, Chapter 12, and we're going to get right into it. So, the overview, as I just mentioned, that's pretty much it. We're also going to be including the Test Your Knowledge, the ever-popular Test Your Knowledge. So if we happen to run out of time on that, hopefully we won't, but if we happen to, I do have it at the end, and it will be included with the PowerPoint itself if you are looking to have that sent to you as well. Okay? So I just wanted to bring this up. This is a lot of information, but it's worth pointing out, as it's indicated in the Book of Style, that the units of measure are the most common and significant qualifiers in the medical record. And of course, that could be, some might say, arguable, but the idea is that, as you can read along here on the screen, it says, in order for a patient's diagnostic information to be meaningful, it must be quantified and qualified. So a numeric value alone will be of little significance without an understanding of the measurement from which that value is derived. And it goes on to say that the most values in the record must be qualified for them to have meaning. And many times, of course, the qualifier or the unit of measure is implied. And the example it gives just below there is that it says, of course, the dictator will rarely dictate 50 mg of Tylenol or spell it out like that as you're going to indicate it. Rather, he says, it will be dictated. The patient was given 50 milligrams of Tylenol. And it's expected, of course, that you, as the MT, will know what to do and will abbreviate it appropriately. So that's a cool thing. I liked that little beginning of, or the prologue, I guess, at the beginning of that chapter, and it was worth pointing out. So I also want to mention these are just interesting tidbits that actually come about in the first part of this chapter, and I'm just going to mention them briefly, and we can come back to them because there's a bit more information that's given in this chapter, but it's worth pointing out. And the first thing is that interesting tidbit at the top that says Hertz, Pascal, and Newton are eponyms, so meaning they're named after someone, the person who created them or for whom it was named after. And they are not capitalized. And the only reason why Hertz is capitalized there, of course, as you probably figured out by now, is that it is at the beginning of the sentence. So Hertz, Pascal, and Newton are actually not capitalized when they're spelled out, even when they stand alone, unaccompanied by a numeric value. And really, for the most part, the only one that you might come across there is Hertz. And I just thought I'd point it out because you can go and refer to the Book of Style, Chapter 12, pardon me, right at the very beginning, 12.1 or 12.2. So I just wanted to point that out because it's just an interesting tidbit that just kind of gets buried a little bit in that chapter, and I wanted to mention it. The other interesting thing at the beginning of that chapter is that the Joint Commission, which is the commission who decides, decides the what things are dangerous and so on. And you can read more about that in the chapter as well. But it does say that, and it specifies that only, and this is an interesting tidbit, and you can follow it up on your own, only micrograms and micro units are on its list of dangerous uses of the symbol and recommends the following. And as you can see on the screen, it says MCG and not the special UG, because it's that special symbol that really creates the problem there. So if you have micrograms, they indicate that it should be MCG, meaning micrograms, and micro units spelled out, not, of course, that special U for the unit and with a capital U, or MCU, because as we know, and as you can read about in Chapter 9, which has been covered in a different session under dangerous abbreviations, that units must be spelled out. So anyway, that's just an interesting little tidbit that is mentioned at the beginning of the chapter, and I thought I'd point out because it is worth pointing out, but that because there's lots of talk about micro and micromoles and all this other stuff too. So it's interesting that when you read it that way, you can actually decide for yourself a little bit better when you come across micrograms or micro units. Okay, so I just wanted to mention those. They are mentioned at the beginning of the chapter. So let's just jump right in, and we're going to start at 12.1.5, as you can see, where it's talking about abbreviations. Now, a lot of this is going to be fairly straightforward and really quite boring. You're going to know most of this stuff, but there is some good stuff in here, and if you can wait until the end, as I mentioned, there is a nice test your knowledge, a little exercise that we'll do at the end as well. Okay, so as it states, you're going to abbreviate most units of measure that accompany numerals and include virgule or the / constructions. And you don't use periods. This doesn't come as a surprise, I'm sure, to most of you, but for some still, I see periods happening after the abbreviations. So don't do it. And it also, of course, points out that the same abbreviation is used for both single and plural forms. So whether it's gram or grams, still the abbreviation is used. You don't add an S. And I think, again, that's fairly straightforward. Excuse me. Pardon me. But it is worth mentioning for sure. So as you can see there, millimeters per hour and so on. And we'll get into that before you start asking questions about whether about this millimeters per hour. We're going to talk about that a little later. The point is that you do abbreviate most units of measure that accompany numerals, and we'll talk about what happens when they don't a little later. And of course, I thought I'd indicate that this is all on within the book of style now as well. I'm just pointing out what is covered in that chapter. So as you can see, the most common metric units, you'll see them there. And of course, in the book of style, they're actually written in American spelling, so don't freak out when you see this. This is actually in Canadian spelling with the liter spelled L-I-T-R-E and meter and so on. So I just thought I'd bring those up just in case. I'm sure you've seen it over the course of your time, and it's worth bringing up just to show them here. And yes, it is millimeter of mercury. That's how it was indicated in the book of style as well. Which of course is the blood pressure measurement. And again, so it just reminds you here that you only use the abbreviation when preceded by a numeric quantity. Okay, when it's not, then you're actually going to spell it out. But we'll talk about that just in a little bit. So, capitalization, again, you do not capitalize most metric units of measure or their abbreviation. So if we go back to here, you can see most, there are some, and we're going to talk about those exceptions, but you can see millimeter, millisecond, millimole, gram, centimeter, meter, so on. There are some that are, of course, as you can see here. And what it indicates here in the next section, it says there are exceptions, of course, because you know me and this world, and there are always exceptions. So you want to note them and actually note them to memory. I don't know why centimeter is actually, why centimeter is actually in there. It shouldn't be. Pardon me. Again, hertz. Interestingly, that the exception is capitalized, that the abbreviation, is capitalized, but that when you type it out, it isn't, which is very curious. So that's definitely one that you'll want to note. Liter, of course, is capitalized. It's not a small l. Decibels, the B is capitalized. I think just for formatting, honestly, to be perfectly honest, to make sure it doesn't get mixed with other things. And of course, millimeter mercury. So there are exceptions, and it just wants you to note that there, of course, are. But generally speaking, we don't capitalize most metric units of measure. Okay? Punctuation, and here we go, and the fun begins. Units are not followed by a period unless at the end of a sentence. And again, I think that's probably straightforward for most of you, but we still do get people who are using periods at the end of the metric units. So you can see here, the only time that there's a period after centimeter, the abbreviation, is when it occurs at the end of the sentence. So the wound was 3 centimeters in length. Of course, centimeter does not have an abbreviation. Okay? Sorry, a punctuation point, a period. Okay? Fairly straightforward. We're going to get into meat here. Okay, so we do not use a hyphen to form a compound modifier between a numeric value and its metric unit. Now, this is a bit of a change from the last book of style, and for those of you who have been around for a bit, you may not have known this. I was used to this, the previous format, but this is a change. So, as you can see here, the examples are a 3 centimeter wound. The 3 and the centimeter, there's no hyphen between when it forms a compound modifier there. And the same as when you're using a size, or that when the X, for example, is used to indicate how big or the dimension of the lesion. So you wouldn't include hyphens there. That's a bit excessive. I don't think anyone would do it that way, but you never know. But the point is that you do not use a hyphen to form a compound modifier. Okay, now there are exceptions for those of you who are thinking about French and the sutures and so on. That's a different thing. We're not talking about that at the very moment. We're talking about now just when you use a hyphen to form a compound modifier between the numeric value and the metric unit. That's specifically what we're talking about here. And I note this other book of style reference that we will come to a little bit later too, because you'll see for non-metric units, things get a little bit interesting. Okay, so I just put that there just as a reference because it refers to this compound modifier business in units of measure. Okay, so fairly straightforward so far. Now, what are we going to get next? Plurals. Again, this is fairly straightforward stuff. Metric units are the same for both singular and plural forms. So as you can see, 1 centimeter, pretty clear. 2 centimeters, meaning you don't add the S. 10 centimeters, no S. So the abbreviation is the same for both singular and plural forms. Now, this is one that's a little trickier for some. As you can see here, the lowercase x should be used to express multiplication of numbers. And we don't mean just as in math multiplication necessarily, but when we're also talking about dimension and so on. So 2 by 8 burn, and you can see here that actually there should be an X right there as well. I had crazy issues with this formatting this morning, so I apologize for that. I will actually change that before I send it as well. As a matter of fact, you know what? Let's change it right now. Why don't we do that? There we go. There. Okay, so as you can see here, so it's a small x and not a big X. There is a big X when we're talking about magnification and so on, and we'll get to that, I think, a little later. But generally speaking, when we're talking about dimensions like this, you use the small x, and you can see that for the most part, you actually have a space before and after it, with the exception of there. When we're talking about there, it's actually times 30,000, and it's a specific number, or it's a specific unit, and it actually mentions that again. And so if you look at your book, if you have a book, or your ebook, whichever you prefer, I'm just going to see what it notes there. Because there are oftentimes when they talk about magnification for there it is. Yeah, other magnifications, there are times when you'll see in very specific situations, you'll see a large X there, or a capital X. But generally speaking, what we're going to talk about for now is that using this small x. And actually, I'm making a note for myself to make sure that we find that reference for the capital X for magnification. Okay, so moving on. And of course, as I mentioned, you'll want to, and you'll see these, you'll probably might have questions about this Virgo and the capital L and so on. We're going to get there. Wait for it. Wait for it. Okay, so here we go. We're now talking about exponential expressions. Of course, this is going to create probably lots of questions. Now, in account specifics, in most account specifics, and I'm just going to be upfront, in many hospital settings or clinic settings and various clinics, your accounts, sorry. A lot of them where the expressions, the exponents, for example, like the superscript won't be allowed. And so what the Book of Style is saying, that the superscripts are acceptable. That's certainly fine. I will get to your questions, by the way, soon. I'm just going to finish this thought. If superscripts are allowed, it's perfectly okay to and perfectly acceptable to use them, as you can see here. But what they're saying is that they do not want you to place the exponent numerals on the same line, which is what we're wont to do sometimes, especially for meters squared, because it just makes more sense sometimes. But as you can see here, so 3 meters squared, you would actually, if you're not allowed superscript, and most of you probably won't bother finding the time with them with your keyboard, or maybe you do, it's up to you. You actually instead put square as in SQ, meter, and that's the abbreviation for meter. And again, we're allowed to do this even though square isn't technically a metric term, but square meter is. So instead of M2 or the 2 on the same line, we would not do that. We'd actually indicate it as 3 meters squared or 3 square meter. And the same goes for this cubic meter and so on. And the same for exponents, which is interesting here. This, as you can see here, 10, that it looks like 105, or you could actually put 10 to the 5th, which looks even more awkward, really. But you would want to put, you don't want to put this. This should be a superscript, for example. They just want to put, you're not going to put the 5 in the same line clearly, because then it becomes 105. Okay? Sorry, I'm going to get to your chats or your questions here. Maybe they're just comments. Oh, good. No questions as of yet. Excellent. Okay, so I'm sure there will be questions on this, but this part is fairly straightforward. Now, I know that when we start getting into kilograms per meter squared and all that as well, I'm sure we'll have questions. But this is interesting because if you go strictly by the Book of Style, this is a little bit counterintuitive than maybe some of you are used to. But just note that this is actually the preferred writing of exponential expressions. Patricia is saying, can we reverse the square meter to meter square? I think is what you're saying there. Sorry. No, you should actually indicate it as it's indicated here, Patricia. Don't change it around according to how you'd say it. I know that's probably why you're asking the question. No, the Book of Style, because account specifics aren't specific about that, then what we have to do then is follow the Book of Style. So you wouldn't reverse that. No, then you're making your own rules. You want to make sure that whatever the Book of Style shows is that's how you want to do it. I understand why you'd want to, because we would say meters squared, but that's not how you represent it. So you would have to put SQ space meter. Now remember, there are no periods. Lisa's saying, even if that's how it's dictated. That's an interesting question, because technically, if it's dictated meters squared, then the idea would be, of course, that's how you're always going to dictate it. Or no, that's how you'll often hear it dictated, because that's how we speak. But if it's actually dictated, for example, 3 meters squared, and you can't use a superscript, then you must put it this way, because that's how the Book of Style tells us to. Okay, so you wouldn't put MSQ, sorry. You wouldn't put MSQ. You'd have to put it square meters, because even though it was dictated, because that's how it's dictated this way, but because we can't put it in that format, we have to put it in the format that the Book of Style tells us, even though when you would say it, you would either, when you say it back, for example, when you repeat it back, you could actually say, sorry, I leaned on my keyboard. You would actually, when you were reading it back from the report, you would say either 3 square meters or 3 meters squared. It just sounds better when you say 3 meters squared. So, no, if you cannot use superscript, then you must indicate it this way, as the Book of Style tells us. Okay? Now, you'll probably see variations on that, but generally speaking, this is what the Book of Style tells us, so that's what we're going to follow. Okay? Okay. Let's move on. Concentrations. Here we go. So this is where it gets a little bit more interesting as well. Sorry, I'm just going to move my notes. There we go. So concentrations can be expressed using a virgule, so the /, in place of the word per, So the forward slash in place of the word per dictated when the following conditions have been met. So two things. The construction involves at least one metric unit of measure and not or, and at least one element includes a specific numeric quantity. So there has to be a number and there has to be a metric unit. So if it was dictated, the CD plus 4 count, cell count was 200 per microliter, this is how you could represent it. You could use the forward slash. Why? Because there's a numeric quantity and there's a metric unit. Same thing goes for blood volume was, oh my goodness, I'm sorry, I keep doing that. Blood volume was 70 milliliters per kilogram of body weight. Now, both of those are actually metric units, so you can still use that in that format because of the rules that are outlined above. Numeric unit and a metric unit at least. So if per was dictated, you would certainly use the forward slash instead of the word per there. No, it's not in the wrong place, Patricia. It can be actually dictated that way and represented that way. Hemoglobin level was 14 grams per liter. Again, there's a numeric quantity there, and there's metric units. So now, that, again, there are lots of hovering exceptions if there's ranges and all kinds of other things. But if we're talking about these specific types of examples where the construction involves one metric unit and one specific numeric quantity, then the forward slash can be used instead of the word per. Okay, and again, that's in 12.1.11. Lisa's saying, sorry, let me just get your comment here. Lisa is saying, but only if the metric unit per, well, per isn't metric unit. So metric unit per is at its lowest form, right? You couldn't put 70 grams per 2 liters. We're getting there, Lisa. Good question. We're going to get there. Again, we're not talking about whether there's two numeric units. We're going to talk about that. But yeah, good question. When we're talking about when there's just the when it involves at least one metric unit and the specific numeric quantity is already in there too. We're going to get there when there's two, and you'll see. Okay, exceptions. As always, do not use the virgule or the forward slash in place of per when a prepositional phrase intervenes between the two units of measure. Sorry, I keep doing, pardon me, that shouldn't be, there we go. There. Weird things are happening. Okay, so she was given 4 milliequivalents of potassium per liter. So the of potassium per liter is the prepositional phrase that's intervening there. And of course, he was advised to take 81 milligrams of aspirin per day. Okay. Now again, you wouldn't actually, and it makes sense really, when you put, you wouldn't put 81 milligrams aspirin and then the virgule per day either. It just, it makes sense if you think about it. So here, remember, the little of, the prepositional phrase that comes in between the metric unit and or the numeric quantity. So if the prepositional phrase intervenes, you are not allowed to use the forward slash. Okay, and again, these are rules that you could actually see in the Book of Style as well. And Lisa's saying, in the first one, could you use liter instead of the word liter? No, because of the fact that you're only allowed to use abbreviations when there's a numeric quantity in advance of it. So because it's just talking about per liter, even though it's assumed that it's one, no, it doesn't. You can't put per liter, like as in type out the word per and liter, because you're going against the most basic rule, which is you're only allowed to use abbreviations when it is accompanied by a numeric quantity. Okay, and again, there are likely exceptions there, you know, and this is a niggly part of the Book of Style because you have to really focus on what is being said here. But in your question, Lisa, no, you wouldn't be able to put potassium and then write out per and then put a capital L for liter. No, because it doesn't, there is not a numeric quantity accompanying. Okay, and there's more do not use, the virgule. So do not use the / in place of per when neither element in the expression represents a unit of measure, when both elements are numeric, or when there are two numeric values accompanying different units of measure. So that says a whole lot of stuff. And essentially it follows with the question that Lisa just asked about if there's something per 2 liters and so on. And you'll see here, so the patient was prescribed Advair 250 per 50 BID. So you can see there that neither is followed by a unit of measure. Okay, so you can't actually put the / in that first example because the unit of measure is not included in either. Now again, there's going to be exceptions to this, but generally speaking. So you see the second one, I called in a prescription for hydrotussin HD 200 milligrams per 10 milliliters. So again, this relates to your question, Lisa. So 200 milligrams per 10 milliliters. So you can see there that there are two numeric values accompanying different units of measure. So there's a numeric quantity for the milligrams, but there's also a numeric quantity for the milliliters, but they're different units. So when that happens, you cannot use the / You actually have to use the word per, okay? This is one of those, lots of stuff to remember in this one. And then there's a but, of course. It says, I will start her on Nortrel 0.5, and then there's a / 35 for pregnancy prevention and management of her PMS. Why is that allowed? And you'll see in your book of style as well, in the numbers, where are we at? We're at 12 point. Oh, there we go. Okay, so we're still in concentrations. So you'll see that it actually outlines that a little bit more than what I included here, and it's because it's a trademarked name, and you'll see that a little bit as well with insulin and other like 70-30 or 30-70. You'll see it in those formulations as well, because there it is. I've just found it. It's a trademark. It's part of the trademark name of the medication. Okay. Yeah. Here's what it actually says in 12.1.11 under concentrations, and it says the exception, if it can be confirmed that such an expression is part of the legally registered trademark for a medication, express the concentration with a virgule as indicated by the manufacturer. Now this is where your research really will come in, and your quick look drug book or other drugs.com various will come in handy, because you'll see that it will be a trademark representation like this Nortrel. Okay, so that is yet another exception to the exception. So note that. Okay, so there's lots of stuff in this. It's a short chapter, but there's lots of stuff that that you need to review over and over, and just get used to, and make sure that you understand that the trick is going to be to understand what is being dictated and how it's being dictated to help guide you on the formatting, as always. Okay? Okay, so now we're getting into conventional units, meaning non-metric units. Okay? Wait, we have a question. Lisa's saying, pardon me, off topic, if the dictator transposes the number, do you correct it? Okay, let's go back. I'll answer that in a bit, Lisa. Generally speaking, it depends. It depends on how it's dictated, and if he's transposed. Sorry, I said I was going to answer it later, but I'll answer it now because I'm going to forget. Sometimes if they transpose it, but then indicate the medication that's related to that number, then no, that becomes an error. Like when it's hydrochlorothiazide and lisinopril and they mix up which is which, then that's an issue, and you should flag that. But in this case, if they actually were to say, for example, and I'd have to confirm it, but I think it doesn't really matter if 35 was the first number and 0.5, although I'd have to confirm that. But you really have to do your research there, Lisa, on that, even if it's dictated, because medications you don't want to mess around with. So make sure that you confirm it with, if that makes sense, if it's a possibility that it could be dictated that way, without affecting patient care, but if there's a possibility that it could and you're unsure, you need to flag it. Absolutely. Especially with medications, don't mess around. Okay? Sometimes it doesn't matter, and sometimes it very much matters. So it really depends on the situation. Use your good judgment, and if you can't figure it out, flag it, by all means. Okay, let's move on to conventional units, which are non-metric units, as I mentioned. So 12.2 and then 12.2.1. This is one that a lot of people, I see this all the time, and it says spell out common non-metric units of measure, meaning ounce, pound, inch, foot, yard, mile, all the non-metric units, okay? So you do not use an apostrophe or quotation marks to indicate feet or inches respectively, okay? So this is a very common mistake I see all the time, and I understand why you might, because it kind of makes sense, but really the Book of Style says, no, not so much. So if you have 4 pounds, 5 ounces, as you can see here, 4 inches, 5 feet, no comma, no apostrophe, and it is certainly not 5 and with the apostrophe and then the 4 quotation marks to represent feet and inches. It is not. Okay, even if it's dictated that way, which it rarely would be anyway, because it would a dictator, just like we mentioned at the very top of this webinar, you're not going to have the apostrophe. He's not going to dictate 5 apostrophe 4 quotation mark. No, of course not. He will dictate 5 feet 4 inches, but which of course makes perfect sense, but you wouldn't represent it as that bottom one there, the 5 apostrophe 4 quotations. Okay. So this is an important one to note, because you'll see this all the time, and I see it all the time, where it's that comma gets in between, okay? And we're going to get into if there's a compound modifier in a bit too, so I know you have questions, okay? Yeah, so that's a good one. So moving right along, so abbreviations of these conventional units, meaning the non-metric units, you do not abbreviate them. So it says, do not abbreviate most non-metric units of measure. Use the same for both singular and plural forms, and do not add the S. And so you'll see here in the examples, 5 feet 3 inches. Sorry, you read left and then right there, just so I don't confuse you. 5 feet 3 inches is not 5 apostrophe 3 quotation, which we covered just a moment ago, or the 5 feet as in FT period 3 IN to represent inches period. So that's how often we've been accustomed to indicating it, but not so much in the Book of Style. According to the Book of Style, I should say, it says do not abbreviate non-metric units of measure. So the same goes for pounds. I see this all the time, that people will indicate pounds with a LBS. Do not do that, because it says no, you actually spell out pounds, okay? And certainly then you wouldn't want to add an S to this, which makes it even worse on top of that. Okay, so this is for non-metric units of measure. Again, good stuff to know, and stuff that maybe you didn't even notice before. And of course it says here, we were just covering this again, do not, and I put it in, I'm yelling at you now, do not use a comma between units of the same dimension, meaning weight, and see here you're talking about height. So the infant weighed 5 pounds 3 ounces. It might look strange to you now, but it will make sense, and it actually looks not strange to me because I'm used to it. So you don't put a comma between pounds and ounces or feet and inches. Okay, pretty straightforward. Why? Because this is a non-metric unit of measure, or also known as a conventional unit. Okay, so that might be news to some of you too, but it's good to know. Good to know. Okay, here we go. Compound modifiers, and I know you're about to ask about them. So it says use a hyphen. What? To join a number and non-metric unit of measure when they are used as an adjective preceding a noun. So when they're used as a compound modifier. So this is different than when with a metric unit. So I'll give you a chance to think about that for a minute. So compound modifiers with a non-metric unit do use a hyphen. So you'll see here 5-inch wound, 8 pound, 5 ounce baby girl. But you'll note, see there, even though There's still no comma in between 8 pound or 5 ounce, but we do use the hyphen to join the non-metric unit of measure with the numeral to form that compound modifier. Okay, and Lisa's saying, I had a dictation once where he was talking about a child and said 5 and 3/12. I know that dictation. 5 and 3/12, and it took me forever to figure out it was an age. Yeah, no, I know that dictation, and that's such an odd way for it to be dictated, but it would be. And really, in something like that, Lisa, and I'm sure the rest of you might probably be nodding your heads too. In something like that, honestly, if you can, Book of Cell doesn't really kind of identify that very specific note, but you could make it this way. Think about it this way. How would you represent, once you know that it's an age, you want to make sure that you represent it as clearly as you possibly can. So you want to relay the information so that someone who's reading it will know exactly what you mean. Okay, and so I'm sure by the time you figured it out, or how it was represented in that answer key made more sense when you were trying to figure it out. But yeah, and you'll hear that often in obstetrical reports too, when they're talking about the gestational age of the infant, or the gestational, in terms of how far along the woman is in her pregnancy. And so often you'll hear about she's 34 and 1/7 or something like that. You hear, because what they mean by that, when you start getting toward the end of your pregnancy, they'll start then dictating not only the number of weeks, but then the days of the week that's coming. So meaning 1/7 or 34 and 1. They'll often say that, which actually means 34 weeks and 1 day of the next week, or 34 and 4. So yeah, there are really tricky ways to indicate that. But just remember, when you're stuck and when you're sweating about it, just think, okay, how am I going to represent this that it will make the most sense to the reader and convey the information that needs to be conveyed? So yeah, good point, Lisa, and I'm glad you brought that up, because that is certainly an exception how that would be dictated. But yeah, so here we go. This is compound modifier. So I think, like I say, this is going to be some interesting to some of you. Sabrina, sorry, because it's related to this question. So about that dictation, is this correct? 5 and 3/12-year-old. Okay, so 5 and 3/12. 5 and 3/12. Because, yeah, year-old. I would say so. That's, yeah, because that actually indicates that he's essentially 5 and a quarter years old, really. Because even if it gets misrepresented as a fraction, that's okay, because that's what you mean. So I would say 3/12-year-old. Yeah. I know, and Lisa's saying he didn't dictate it as an age. No, I know, and they may not often. So that's up to your experience and using your critical thinking skills in terms of context, and you're going to have to do that all the time. And you may not know it when it's first dictated, but once you get through, as you go through in the report, and you flagged it at the beginning, you think, oh, wait a minute, he was just dictating an age there. Or if you still don't know, then of course you're going to flag it. Shara is saying, or could you say 5 years and 3 months? No, you couldn't say that, Shara. It makes sense. Actually, it wouldn't be 3/12. It would be, that's right, sorry, 3 months. But you couldn't include months there, because that's not what he said. So in a verbatim environment, you couldn't do that. It makes sense, and that's exactly what's intended. But in a verbatim environment, you have to maintain as close to verbatim as you possibly can. Now, in the real world, and I don't mean that the real world doesn't have verbatim, because that's actually not true. Many accounts do have verbatim, but in the absence of verbatim, then you could represent it as you indicate, Shara, because that's in fact what we're talking about here. But in a verbatim environment, yeah, you would have to indicate it as closely, if not exactly, verbatim. Okay, yeah, that's a tricky one for sure, yeah. Okay, we're running out of time as usual. Yoo-hoo! Okay, here we go. Here's another one. Oh, look, more exceptions. Expressions of concentration involving non-metric units of measure. You spell out the word per. There's a whole lot of information in this. And do not use, I'm yelling. Look, I'm yelling everywhere. And do not use the virgule or the forward slash, since the forward slash implies an abbreviated expression, and non-metric units are not abbreviated in the record. Okay, well, that is really hard to figure out in your head. Let's read it one more time, and then we're going to go to some examples. So, expressions of concentration involving non-metric units of measure, spell out per, and do not use the virgule. Okay, so that's saying the same thing. So we just have to, non-metric units of measure, you spell out per. That's it. That's all we have to remember at this very moment. Except when it says the exception. It says you can use a forward slash or a virgule when the expression combines a metric unit with a non-metric unit. Okay, so what it says then, so if there's a concentration which involves a non-metric unit of measure, then we have to spell it per. Okay, all right, just get that in your head for a minute. But then it says the exception is you can use the forward slash when there's both a metric unit and a non-metric unit. What the heck does that mean? Let's look. Heart rate was 120 beats per minute. Okay. Okay. And we're going to go through them and then we'll kind of try to make sense. And she takes 5 milligrams of Valium per day. Okay. She weighs in 3 days per week. Again, so these are pretty easy because you think, all right, well, so these are all non-conventional units. And of course, the 5 milligrams of Valium, there's the prepositional phrase there, and it's per day. Per day is non-metric, okay, but that you can't use it there because of the of Valium, the prepositional phrase. 120 beats per minute, neither one of those are metric, so non-metric, so you can't use it there. Okay, but her IV was set to run at, and some of you who did Chapter 11 with me will remember this because they use it again. Her IV was set to run at 10 micrograms per minute while she was in the ER. What? Why are you allowed to use it there? Because of that exception rule that says when there's a non-metric unit and a metric unit together combined, then you can use the forward slash. Now, of course, if it said 10 micrograms per 2 minutes, obviously you were not allowed to use the virgule there or the forward slash. Why? Because there's two different measurements, two different units of measure. But because here there is a numeric quantity and there's a non-metric unit and a metric unit, you're allowed to use them both. And you think, well, why is minute allowed to be abbreviated there? Another exception, and we're going to get to that too. But no, that's here you're allowed to use that because there's a non-metric unit, which is the minute, and a metric unit, microgram, and it's combined together in one unit of measure together. And so you are allowed to use the forward slash there. And you're welcome for making your day just complete heck now. I know. Okay, Lisa's saying, and we are running out of time here, guys, so I might have to send you the test your knowledge. Okay, Lisa's saying, do you have to use abbreviation, the non-metric, what? Do you have to use abbreviation, the non-metric unit, in order to use the virgule? I'm not sure what you mean by that, Lisa. If it's actually, if you put microgram per minute, I think that would actually be less clear, if that's what you mean. Well, and in theory, because it says so in the Book of Cell, it would actually be probably a minor formatting error if you did include the per there. Per minute, not. Oh, per minute, you spelled out minute. Well, you know, that actually. So if you actually spelled out per minute, because here it's actually abbreviated. And it actually, there's a rule guiding that. So hold that thought, Lisa, just for a second, because we're going to get there. Okay, units of time. Thank you, Judy, for coming. I will send it. If you can't grab this material, send me a note if you want me to send you this material separately as well. It will be posted too. Okay, units of time. Do not abbreviate expressions of units, English units of time, except in virgule constructions. Here we go. And do not use periods with such abbreviations. Okay, so what we're talking about here, we don't abbreviate expressions of units, English units of time, meaning days, minutes, etc. But The patient is 5 days old. Okay, that's pretty straightforward. He will return in 1 week. Okay, so meaning you're not going to use WK or D for days or something like that. Okay, so we don't want to use abbreviations there. Now, it does say 40 millimeters per hour. You are allowed that. Why? Because of the rule that we just talked about before, when there's a non-metric and metric, metric units used together. But you will see the Q4H. Now, this is a whole other separate conversation. That Q4H, that's actually in Chapter 9 as well, and you are allowed to use that because it's part of a Latin abbreviation that combines English and Latin, and you'll see the space there. But I wanted to point them out because you will see them, and these are actually exceptions of examples as well. So generally speaking, the rule that we're talking about, though, is that we don't abbreviate expressions of units of time, English units of time, except in virgule construction. So that's what they're talking about. That's why you're allowed to use the H there for a number of reasons, not the least of which is this rule, but also in that Latin abbreviation rule as well. So virgule constructions, and that's a Latin abbreviation. So we're going to move right along, and I know you're going to have questions. So it says here, so it also says in the book itself, so you can read more about this. So if you are going to abbreviate English units of time in virgule construction, so if they're made together with a metric unit, you'll see here, and this I think gets to your point a little bit, Lisa. Minute is MIN, second is a second, week. You'll see. As you can see, you can read there. And so those are the abbreviations that you are going to use if all else is okay and you're allowed to in those special / or virgule constructions. So I know this is more information piling on and piling on, but it makes sense if you read over it and see, okay, I'm not generally supposed to abbreviate this stuff, but when I'm allowed to, these are the abbreviations that you're allowed to use for those English units of time that generally are not abbreviated, okay? Okay, we got to keep going. Temperature, degrees. I think this is fairly straightforward for everybody too, except note that you express, you express temperature degrees with numerals except for 0. So if 0 degrees, when it's all by itself like that and it's represented as a temperature, you have to spell it out according to the Book of Style. And I'll get to your point in a second, Tina. Use minus, not the symbol, to indicate temperatures below 0. So if it's minus 48 degrees Celsius, then you have to actually spell out the word minus when we're talking about temperatures, okay? Okay, and just a note here, if the temperature scale name, so if Celsius or Fahrenheit is not mentioned, you don't have to insert it. It's not necessary. And if the degree symbol is not available or accepted, you write out the word degrees and the temperature scale name if they're dictated. Okay, and a space should exist between the numeric value and its unit of measure. And so essentially what we're talking about is that's why, see, you don't see there's a space between the unit of measure, but there's no space between the degree and the Celsius, but there is a space between degrees. If you were typing out degrees Celsius, or the word Celsius, it would of course be a space after degrees and in between degrees and Celsius, as you see here. Okay, let me just see comments here. A second is book. Okay, you guys have to be a little more clear in your questions. Tina's saying the second, is in the book, shows S, not SEC. Well, we'll see. Let me just confirm that because it actually shows it in the quick reference too. Oh, it does too. Thank you, Tina. My goodness. Yeah, we're going to go back and actually do that right now. So the temperatures, remember that the, the temperatures, remember that we're going to, you have to spell out the word minus. Okay, angles, and we're almost near the end here. In expressing angles in orthopedics, you write out the degrees or use the degree symbol, but typically it's not allowed or available. And degrees is a non-metric unit. So you'll see compound modifying expressions should be hyphenated when the word is spelled out, just like they are with non-metric units. So in orthopedics especially, 90-degree angle, that's hyphenated when it forms a compound modifier. Why? Because it's a non-metric unit, and that's what we're told to do. If it's a metric unit, we don't. But since it's degrees is a non-metric unit, you're going to see that hyphen. So 180-degree arc, that's often in radiation and various imaging, and 90-degree angle, same, or in orthopedics. But it does mention if you actually say an angle of 90 degrees or a view of 360 degrees, of course, there is no hyphen there because it no longer becomes a compound modifier in that way. Okay. Okay, and I did want to mention here that there are quick reference guides for the units of measure in the, if you have a hard copy of the book, it's at the very end of the chapter. I did want to mention that. Units by type, common prefixes, and metric conversions if you need it as well, you know, so from inches to centimeters and things like that. Okay, so there are actual quick reference guides there as well. Okay, we have 10 minutes, so more questions. I guess we did have some questions along the way. Thank you again, Tina, for that comment. I appreciate that. Thanks, everybody. Yep. No problem. You have to leave. No problem. Thanks for joining me. Okay, here we go. And you know what? We might have to send the answers to you if you don't get them, although we should have enough time. So I'm going to give you, here are the 10 questions. And oh my goodness, I just gave you the answers. Here we go. So here are the questions, and if you want to just wait for me to send those, that's fine, because there are 10, and it might take you longer than what I can give you, just because from a time perspective. But as you'll see, I do have an answer key, and I also, in the answer key, it has a reference. The book of style reference that it may not be the only one, but certainly the one that we would point to for the reasoning behind the answer. Okay? So I'll give you a few minutes to go over this, and certainly if you have any more questions, you can ask them now as well. But hopefully those of you will be able to get that. It's a PowerPoint that's attached to this webinar now at this very moment, so you can grab it, or you can email me and let me know if you would like the copy of the PDF. Pardon me, I'll send it as a PDF just because it's it will take up less space. Yeah, because what I'll also do then, included in that is the answer key for the test your knowledge, and this isn't the actual answers right here. It's the questions. Just going to fix that as well. So, sorry, there you go. Those of you that were looking. And so, yeah, if you're trying to write these all down in a mad dash, then maybe what I would suggest to you is you try doing them and then wait until I send you, do them, and then wait until I send you the file, and then you can actually see what the answer is too. Okay? Lisa's saying, I just clicked on your link and downloaded it and the answers are already there. Oh, well, Lisa, that's just cheating. Well, of course they're already there, because I didn't want to not include the answers, because then it would be too confusing for me to try to remember who got what. So yeah, the answers are actually, in fact, included in the file that's attached. So you can actually wait and just, if you want to try to really test your knowledge. I'm just going to, maybe we'll end it there, unless we want to talk about the answers or why they would be, or if any of you have questions about these. But essentially what it is actually just going over the material that we've just covered. So I don't want to ruin it for people if you want to take it and not know the answers just yet. So maybe we'll do that. And I'm just going to actually skip ahead to the questions part, and just remind everybody that certainly I would welcome your comments and feedback and questions, anything at all. And I'm just going to go really quickly here. Number 6, oh sorry, Shelley saying, can you tell us about number 6, please? This is one that actually isn't specifically, I threw this in here as a not a trick question, but as one because it's one that we've covered before. It's not particularly in this chapter. It's in another chapter, and it's related to non-conventional units. And I'll give you a hint. It's actually in chapter 10. So we did cover this before, but it's actually in chapter 10, and it's related to punctuation and hyphenation when it's non-conventional, non-metric. That's right. Yep. Yep. Good question, but it's meant to see who's paying attention. So yeah, you're welcome. Okay, so you know what? I'm gonna fast forward to my questions. There we go. I saw the answers there just really quickly. More questions, and I'm gonna put my own email there for those of you who want the file and who can't get it to me. Now, I did make changes to that file that isn't the same as the one that's now attached, just minor things, of course. So, you know, forgive me for those. But certainly, if you want me to send you the PDF, I'm happy to do that. I would suggest that you certainly send me an email right away, because I'll send it right away, because we are going to, well, I am anyway, going to AGM, and I'm going to be out until Monday. So if you want it right away, you might want to grab it now, or email me right away and I will send it. Patricia's saying suggestion for webinar is dates and times. Okay, you can actually send that to me, Patricia, by all means, but also know that, I mean, really, dates and times, we really have to stick for the most part to the Wednesdays at this point, but they are recorded, and the files are actually attached to the online class webinars forum page as well. So there's always that. Cheryl saying, should the answer to number 7 use as SS the abbreviation and not sex as per sec as in SEC as per the BOS? Oh, to cover dates and times in the webinar topic. I think I have actually in various times, but anyway, you certainly send it to me, Patricia, just to make sure that we can add it to the list. Thank you, Monica. I know you're gone already, but Cheryl, let me check on I think I probably would have picked that up in my answer, because it was really late last night when I did it. Let me just check my answer. Let me check my answer. Number 7. I'll check that for sure. I think it actually has SEC, and there might be a reason now that I'm thinking of it, actually, Cheryl, but thank you for pointing it out. And if it is, I'll actually address that. I'll pull down that file, but I think it actually is. Either of those actually I think are acceptable, which may be why I put that. Anyway, I won't keep you all, but I'm going to check that right away. And thank you for joining me. Again, I will post, what I might do is actually I'll update the file that I'm going to post together with the recording here, and make sure that it's the most current. So thank you everybody for joining me today. I appreciate you being here with me, and I would also appreciate your comments, concerns, suggestions as well. So happy to be here, and let me know if you'd like a copy, if you can't get a copy of the PDF or the PowerPoint from the site. Okay, thanks everybody. Have a great day, and we'll talk to you next time.